What's going live?
Hey, welcome to Still Kicking with Billy Howard. This is our third show. It's February 21st, 2017. We've got a great show for you tonight. Here's some of the stories we're going to do. The elites are still attacking the working class. U.S. surveillance state is attacking U.S. democracy. New immigration policy to enforce existing immigration laws. And we have two new segments for you tonight. We're going to do a regular segment called the Fascist Spotlight, where we shine the light on examples of American fascism. And tonight we're going to do the Affordable Care Act and a story about Charlestown, Indiana, just across the river from Louisville, Kentucky, where we are webcasting tonight. And we also have a new segment called the Luddite Lounge, where we relax and have a rare discussion of tech's deep downside. We have all that and more. So welcome to Still Kicking with Billy Howard, live every Tuesday at 7:30. We are webcasting from beautiful Louisville, Kentucky, where I was born and raised. And this is show number 3, and I'm hoping 3 is a charm. I've had trouble finding my footing, but I've been working hard to make the show shorter and better. What we're shooting here is we're shooting for 30 minutes. So hopefully we'll make it tonight. I ran long the first 2 shows, and I'm sorry. I also realize that I'm saying things almost nobody wants to hear. And it's not a great way to build an audience, but at least you know I'm telling you the truth fearlessly, no matter what you may think of me. So here's your official viewer warning. I will say what you don't want to hear. And my views could be incorrect. But I seek truth with as much honesty and humility as I can muster. I'm the guy to say these things because I'm already widely hated. My haters are legion. So if you join my haters, I will hardly notice. People I talk to are having a hard time understanding what happened in November, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it too, just like you. And this week I've had some revelations. Now you already know, if you've seen the first 2 shows, that I think this election was a working class rebellion. That it is about class, not sexism or race or hatred. It's about workers. It's about labor. The working class, as far as I can tell, is pretty evenly split between the Democrats and the Republicans. Both parties were surprised to have working class rebellions on their hands. The Democrats had Bernie Sanders, who was my guy, and I'm not really a socialist, but I did back him. I sent him some money. The Republicans had Donald Trump. Now, the working class rebellion failed in the Democratic primary, mostly due to cheating and the fact that Democrats have abandoned the working class. And believe me, the working class know this. And also, Bernie, he talked about these trade bills in the working class, but he didn't do it as effectively as Donald Trump did. Now, the working class rebellion, of course, succeeded in the Republican Party, mainly because Trump spoke to their concerns more effectively and attacked and bypassed the news media, who has also abandoned the working class. He also correctly blamed these trade deals for the decline of the working class and the middle class. People forget tariffs don't just protect industries. They protect workers from the labor practices of tyrants in other countries. Now, the press in both parties refused to admit one thing, and my good friend Margaret said this, so I have to give her credit. She put it in a way that I think really says it all. The press and both parties, especially the establishment of both parties, have turned their backs on the working class. So they obsess about Russian hacking instead of the cheating and the arrogance that the hacking revealed. Our arrogant elites in the press and the party establishments won't admit that working people put Mr. Trump in office. And of course, so did the cheating. You know, this cheating really did have consequences. And if you want to blame anybody for Donald Trump being in the White House, you can blame Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Donna Brazile and John Podesta and Hillary Clinton. Not just for cheating, but for running a really terrible campaign that didn't speak at all to working class concerns. And you know what? Nobody seems to care about this cheating. It's all about the Russian hacking, and they're trying to, drum up this conspiracy theory about Russia and Trump. Well, I want to see some evidence. So let's move on. The news media's failure to admit and cover the truth of this election is a lie of omission, and that is their favorite kind of lie. And I will say, I agree with Trump when he says the news media is the enemy of the people. They truly, truly are, and they have been for a long time. But they are an ally of the 1%. They really are, because it is the corporate media. Now, Trump is right that the news media are liars, and I say they're liars because they intend to mislead us. They are virtuoso propaganda artists. They do fake news all the time, but they do real propaganda. Our elites, and all of us really, began to lose our humanity when we turned our backs on ordinary American workers. And sometimes I think that we are so enthralled by technology and globalism and futurism, we've lost touch with our humanity, our community, and our society. The culture has turned mean. And if you don't believe me, just say something nice to somebody about Donald Trump, and you will get a face full of meanness. Or talk about the workers who put him in office. Now, good government throughout the millennium, their real job has been to regulate the economy so that the gifted people in any society don't enslave everybody else. In fact, if you read the charter of the Tory party in England, and the Tory party is the Conservative party in England, and the first line of the charter says, we want to make sure that the aristocrats don't turn the rest of the English people into slaves. It's that simple. And this is true for good government around the world, but there's precious little of it these days. And the civil courts are one of the most important instruments of government. The civil courts are what keep blood from running in the streets. They're there to enforce contracts. If drug dealers could go to civil court, they wouldn't kill each other in Chicago or Baltimore or Detroit or any great American city. They would go to court and sue each other. So just think if American corporations couldn't sue each other, what this world would be like. It would be worse than feudal. And, that's just part of regulating the economy. And that is what the governments throughout the millennium have done. But we've seen precious little of that kind of government here at home or in the Western world. But they have done a great job of servicing the rich and making them richer. So let's move on. The top stories. Well, the number one story, as far as I'm concerned, is that the intelligence community has become so leaky since November, you'd think that they are plotting a coup right here at home. They like trading with tyrants. They want to protect that cookie jar where Apple can make their little iPhones for 85 cents an hour. Now, how are American workers going to compete with 85 cents an hour? Yes, the CIA wants to protect that cookie jar for them and their Ivy League brethren at the corporations. Now, this is a good time to remind you that your host is not a pro-Donald Trump guy. I just feel like he's being ganged up on, and I don't like to see anybody ganged up on. And I don't like people to be treated with inhumanity, and I think that we're doing that to our president. We're not even giving him a chance to settle into his job. And we're not trying to help him, we're trying to tear him down. And I remind you that I am a liberal and a Democrat. I love this country or I wouldn't bother doing this show. It takes time and effort. And I also believe capitalism is a great system. It's a truly powerful system for creating wealth. But I believe it has to be fair, not rigged. And that is what good government does. It makes sure that the capitalist system is fair and that anybody can try their hand at it. Unfortunately, our elites do not believe this. They want to rig it for themselves, including the torturers at the CIA. They have truly lost their humanity, and I doubt they ever had humility. So the intelligence community destroyed Michael Flynn. Apparently, it's not right for a U.S. government official to talk to an ambassador. What's that all about? Our intelligence community seems bent on a bureaucratic insurrection. And civil libertarians, including the ACLU, don't seem worried that our authoritarian surveillance state is being used against our elected leaders. It's being used against democracy itself. But the Fourth Amendment is no big whoop to the ACLU. I get their fundraising letters all the time, and they very rarely mention the surveillance state. They very rarely mention the Fourth Amendment. But, I remind you, the Fourth Amendment is your freedom. That's what keeps the government out of your house, out of your pockets, out of your car, out of your stuff in general. And the ACLU does very little to protect the Fourth Amendment. But, I'll tell you who has been good about this Fourth Amendment are some libertarians like Rand Paul. And even though I've been a Democrat my whole adult life, I voted for Rand Paul, and I was a little scared to do it. I didn't know what he was going to be like, but I've got to say, I don't regret it at all. So there you have it. Civil libertarians don't seem to care about the intelligence community's slow-motion coup against the president. Privacy matters. It's the foundation of freedom. And I'm sorry that this top story is so sad, but it's been going on since he was elected. They have been drumming up this whole Russian conspiracy theory, and yet they haven't presented one shred of evidence. We're supposed to trust them, trust these liars at the CIA and these torturers. I'm sorry, I know we need an intelligence community, but I do not respect what they're doing. Now we also have another top story, the new immigration policy that was announced today. Evidently, the policy is going to include more agents. I heard thousands, maybe as much as 10,000 new ICE agents. It's also going to deport more immigrants. The good news is it leaves DACA, the Dreamers law, in place, or policy, not law. And so if you were brought here by your parents, you don't have to worry, at least for now. But it's going to change some things. If you were convicted of pretty much any crime, you will be susceptible to deportation. And that would include things like using fraudulent documents. And I think most illegal immigrants probably have to do that. So it's not just felonies. And also, it's going to change the expedited removal. And what they're going to do is, under Obama, if you were only here for 14 days or less, they could remove you without any kind of a hearing. And now they're going to up that to 2 years. So if you've only been here 2 years, no hearing. If you've been here longer than that, evidently you can get a hearing and a lawyer and all that. So what strikes me about this whole immigration debate is the rule of law. If we're not going to keep our immigration laws, are there other laws that we can ignore too? And I do notice that with La Raza and all the pro-immigration groups, that there's this sense of entitlement among illegal aliens, that they're entitled to come to our country and entitled to work. And I was telling my producer that immigration policy is one of the things Trump is doing for the working class. If you don't think 12 million immigrants, and that's the official estimate, you can't count this thing by its very nature. If you don't think that has an effect on labor markets. And, I listened to a whole hour show this morning on NPR, on A1, and they talked about this new immigration policy. And in a whole hour, not once did they mention cheap labor, much less labor markets. And U.S. corporations lust for cheap labor. And that's why all these past governments have just let immigrants flood over the border. They want cheap labor. And I'm going to tell you, just to finish up this story, about 4 or 5 months ago, the Wall Street Journal did an article about Arizona. Evidently, and I've read this a long time ago, and I can't remember the percentages, but in Arizona, right after the financial crisis, Arizona lost like 30 or 40% of its illegal aliens. They left the state. And it was partly because of the recession. It was partly because Arizona had some new laws that they passed about immigration. And some economists in the Midwest at some Midwestern university that I can't remember noticed this, and they said, let's go down to Arizona and see what effect it had on the economy. And they found three things. The first thing was that it did affect Arizona's GDP, but just insignificantly. It went down just a tiny little fraction. But the two big things that happened that the economists noticed, that when all these illegal immigrants left, wages at the bottom of the labor market went up significantly. And rents at the bottom of the rental market went down significantly. So our poorest workers benefited the most. That's right. Their rents went down and their wages went up, and it was a huge relief to them. And not only to American citizens at the bottom of the scale, but to the illegal aliens that stayed. So labor markets are the big factor in immigration, and that is one of the big truths that goes down the corporate media's memory hole. And it's a huge, gaping memory hole. All right, those are the two top stories for tonight. Now it's time for our new segment, The Fascist Spotlight, where we shine a light on examples of American fascism. Now, this segment has a sponsor. It is brought to you by the Clinton Foundation, where global fascism has made us very, very rich. When we want to thank the Clinton Foundation for sponsoring the global fascist, or the Fascist Spotlight. Now, first, what do I mean by fascism? Do I mean Hitler? Do I mean Nazis? No, I don't. Now, they were fascist, and this is true. But what they really were racist fascists. Now, let's go to the source of modern fascism. It was created by a man named Benito Mussolini in Italy. In the early part of the 20th century, he came up with it. And he was the dictator in the 20s, I believe, in Italy. And Hitler admired him, and Hitler copied him. But Hitler grafted on racism. Now, what did Benito Mussolini say fascism was? He said, I wished I'd called it corporatism, because it's just merging the corporation with the state. In other words, a corporate takeover of the state. Now, the president during World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he said fascism is when private interests take over the state. Now, that's basically the same thing as Mussolini said. And both are apt descriptions of the U.S. government today. Corporations write the laws. Their lobbyists write the laws. You and I are not at the table. So in effect, what happens when the corporation takes over the state is that corporations get to regulate themselves. And as we said earlier, this is the state's job, is to regulate corporations, to regulate commerce, and to regulate our personal morality and crime. And, you know, if you let corporations regulate themselves and write the laws, well, voila, no bankers go to jail, in spite of committing massive fraud and theft. Because all that fraud left to theft, mostly of their clients. But when it came to the bailouts, every taxpayer in this country. And because of the corporations writing the law, we now have this thing called civil fraud. And civil fraud is only punishable by fines. But if you and I commit fraud, it's criminal fraud, and we go to jail. So they pay these civil fines with the bailout money provided by taxpayers. And if they run out of that, they have the stockholders' money, which is basically the customers' money. So maybe we should just let drug dealers make the laws. They're just trying to make a buck too, really. I'm just kidding, okay? So let me just say this about Mr. Trump. He is a fascist, but he is no more fascist than Bill Clinton was or Barack Obama. And let's start with Obama and the Affordable Care Act. My good friend, who is letting us do this show in her home tonight, we were talking about the ACA a couple of years ago, and I was telling her how fascist it is. And she said, no, Billy, it's a hybrid. It's part socialist and part fascist. And she was absolutely right. And by the way, this very good friend of mine is a staunch Republican and conservative. And I'm a staunch liberal and Democrat. And we are friends. And we respect each other. And we listen to each other. And that is why I have changed my opinion slightly about this. Well, the socialist part of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, is the expanded Medicaid. The fascist part is the individual mandate, using IRS to coerce you into the individual health insurance market, and the government subsidies. Those subsidies go to the health insurance industry, not to you. Now, what industry wouldn't want the government to coerce people to buy their service using the IRS, the most feared and dreaded agency in the federal government? And what industry wouldn't want the government to subsidize people to buy their product? What the ACA is welfare for the insurance industry. And when the ACA was written by the insurance industry and passed and signed into law by Barack Obama, healthcare stocks zoomed to the sky. And they are still zooming to the sky. So the individual mandate and subsidies are nothing less than welfare for the health insurance industry, whose products are neither affordable or high quality, but very profitable for them. Now, the Trump administration has changed some of the rules on the ACA, or actually they've proposed these changes. I don't think they're actually changed yet. And Trump said what he wanted to do was create more incentives and certainty for the insurers. So you see, it's always about the corporations. It's not about you. And even if it's a hybrid, it's still fascist. Now, what these new proposed rules will do is shorten the open enrollment window so people won't wait till they get sick to buy a policy. And they give states more authority to review the adequacy of health plan networks and require eligibility verification for buying insurance outside that open enrollment window. They also give insurers greater latitude on the amount of health care cost they cover on exchange plans. So isn't that great? And insurers say that the tax penalty needs to be enforced so younger, healthier people will sign up. I suppose that is if they're not being crushed by student debt. The mandate is not addressed by these new rules. Now, personally, I can afford health insurance, but I don't have it. I just pay the fines. And I paid the fine last year, and I'll pay it this year. But my strategy when it comes to my own personal health care is prevention. I became a vegetarian when I was 26, and I exercise daily, and I pray. And I not only just ask God for things, but I just sit quietly and try to listen, just in case he wants to say something to me. You might call it meditation, but it calms me down. And so that's what I do. And and I don't mind paying the coercive tax because I'm fortunate enough to afford it. And maybe I'm helping to pay for others to get health care, and that's fine. Now, our other fascist spotlight story is about Charlestown, Indiana, right across the river from Louisville. Now, fascism is a public-private partnership. And we have a local example right here in the Ohio River Valley that is particularly egregious and heartless. It's happening in Charlestown, Indiana, where a wealthy investor from Louisville is using the city government of Charlestown to terrorize the citizens in a neighborhood of modest means and even poverty. The story makes the sheriff of Nottingham seem like a good guy. But there is a Robin Hood of sorts named Jeff Rose of a D.C.-based law firm called the Institute for Justice. And he said what this city is doing is virtually unprecedented. In my words, I say it's a new fascist low. Now, I'm no fan of our local paper, the Courier-Journal. It's a Gannett paper. But I do give them credit for this coverage, especially the journalists who did these two stories that I've seen, Madeline Weiner, Kristen Clark, and Kristen Goetz. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. It's Goetz. But what's happening? There's this developer from Louisville named John Nance who controls Pleasant Ridge Redevelopment, and that's the name of the neighborhood he's trying to take over. And he's attempting to buy every property in Pleasant Ridge, a neighborhood of modest means, using the city government of Charlestown, Indiana, to coerce residents to sell using aggressive home inspections and huge fines. The city and Mr. Nance envision a high-end housing complex with quaint shops and outdoor gathering spots to replace this low-income neighborhood. And some of these initial fines were so high, they were as high as $10,000, and they accumulate daily. Some fines have reached as high as 6 figures in just weeks, way above the value of these houses. Now, one landlord, and 75% of these properties are owned by landlords, so most of the people in this community are renters, as you would expect in a low-income community. And one of the landlords, Greg Yeager, who sold to the developer before the fines accrued, said, "When I called the guy buying them, he said, 'I'll tell Bob,'" referring to the Charlestown mayor, Bob Hall, "to stop the inspection." So they are definitely in cahoots, if that's true, what he said. 140 of the 375 properties have been sold to the developer so far. Now, the City Council of Charlestown passed a resolution recently calling for a permanent solution, that's what they called it, to the neighborhood that it describes as the projects. Doesn't that have echoes of the final solution? That was also fascist, yes. Well, the City Council asked the mayor to use every means possible, code enforcement, criminal laws, animal control, health codes, any regulation to accomplish their permanent solution. Fines are only waived if the homes are removed. They're not going to get any chance to, address the violations. They have to just tear down the house. So this is fascism to the nth degree. It's unprecedented and it's appalling. Now, the neighborhood's lawyer, Jeff Rose, the Robin Hood, is concerned it could become a nationwide model for using crushing code enforcement to force low-income people out of their homes for private development of upscale communities. And I think with Donald Trump, the private developer in office, we better be very wary of this kind of thing. This developer so far has paid on average $10,000 for the majority of the 140 homes he's bought so far. So the first initial fine is the value of the house. But the houses themselves were assessed at $30,000 or $40,000, and that's what the taxes they were paying were based on. And why does this very, very wealthy John Nance lust for these homes? Well, they are near the River Ridge Commerce Center, which is doing very well, especially since the new Lewis and Clark Bridge was built very recently that links Charlestown, Indiana to eastern metro Louisville for the first time. So, it's all about unmitigated greed. The bridge to a quaint fascist town called Charlestown, Indiana. And you thought only the feds were fascist. Our government rots from the top down. So that's it for the top fascist spotlight. Now it's time for the Luddite Lounge, where we're free to discuss the trouble with tech. And the Luddite Lounge is brought to you tonight by Taser International, making torture simple, easy, and fun. Endorsed by the Chicago Police Department and the Mayor of Chicago, Ron Emanuel. Now, let me start out the first Luddite Lounge by saying almost any environmental problem you can name has been caused by science and technology. Yes, it's true. Now, there's a lot of Tesla cars zipping around my neighborhood, charged by Louisville Gas and Electric Company, which generates their electricity mostly by burning coal. So all these Teslas are really coal-powered. This whole idea of zero emissions is a marketing term, not a fact. You, my dear audience, may argue, well, solar and wind energy will soon charge our Teslas and our Volts and other plug-in cars. Well, I take no pleasure in reminding you that both of these technologies, wind and solar, have serious environmental downsides. The blades of a giant wind turbine are made with aluminum, the most energy-intensive metal to mill. A small mountain of coal must be burned to produce each blade. Wind turbines are also attractive to birds as potential nesting places, especially large birds of prey, like American bald eagles. They are attracted to them, and they go to investigate the windmill to see if it's a good place for a nest, and then whap! They're killed by the blade. And the statistics are depressing. Now, if you are unfortunate enough to be out in the country and you live near one of these wind turbines on your neighbor's land, you will have to get used to the constant moaning they emit, as well as the intermittent shadows, not to mention the maimed and dead birds that will be on your lawn. So keep the bird rescue number handy if they build one next to you. Solar panel manufacture creates its own waste, some of it toxic, and solar farms cover the land like pavement, causing watershed issues, besides marring the landscape. And Thomas Alva Edison was the father of global warming because he built the first coal-fired generating station in Manhattan in New York. So don't expect technology to solve our environmental problems. Technology is the cause of our environmental problems. You know, the much worshipped internet on which I'm coming to you now uses twice the fuel of all worldwide aviation. That includes public, private, and military combined every day. The NSA server farm in Bluffdale, Utah, used to keep our dossiers, all the spying dossiers on us, uses as much energy every day as the city of Louisville, Kentucky, where we are webcasting from today. So spying on U.S. citizens pollutes more than just freedom. Servers use so much energy they get hot, and they must be air conditioned so they don't shut down. It's like air conditioning a room full of hair dryers. Google, Microsoft, Amazon are energy hogs and major contributors to global warming. Smartphones, I just read in the paper this morning, are causing our car insurance rates to go up. So thank you, Steve Jobs. I wasn't paying enough for my car insurance, and I'm glad it's going up because of all you people that text and drive. You know, think of science. Chemistry has given us countless toxic Superfund waste sites and polluted aquifers and streams and lakes. Physics has killed millions from bomb test fallout, from fuel processing, from microwave radiation, nuclear accidents, not to mention actual nuclear bombs designated over cities. Now, I'm not saying science and technology hasn't given us good things, like medical breakthroughs, but they have cost us greatly. And I would say it's fair to say there is a fair amount of hubris in science and technology and engineering. So, you know, if you try to get an environmentalist to talk about conservation instead of some technological salvation, it's almost impossible. It's like pulling teeth. They won't talk about conservation, and that's the low-hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is that I drive, personally, a low-emission vehicle, and I try to drive it as little as possible. I've had it for 12 years, and I just hit 90,000 miles. It's not great, but I want to get better. And one last thought. Oh, you know what? I didn't mention this, too. Oh, I did. Did I talk about immigration? No. In immigration, well, I did talk about immigration, didn't I? Yes, I did. Well, in immigration, this new immigration reform is going to help the American workers. And one last thought. I'm sorry I'm a little verklempt, but my last thought is this. I don't think we can blame the Amish for our environmental crisis. Think about that. Thank you for watching another episode of Still Kicking with Billy Hauer. We'll be back live next Tuesday at 7:30. Live. That is, if I'm still kicking. Live up and be free.